household, Halloween was always a special occasion, filled with pumpkins, decorations, and costumes that transformed the suburban home into a spooky spectacle. This year, however, the festive spirit was overshadowed by an undercurrent of family tensions, particularly between Kevin and his older brother Buzz. As the day progressed, Kevin, the youngest McAllister, felt increasingly sidelined. His ideas for the family costume were dismissed, his decorations were rearranged, and his pleas to be treated as more than just the baby of the family were ignored. Buzz, reveling in his role as the tormentor, found one too many opportunities to tease Kevin, culminating in a prank that left Kevin covered in fake blood. Much to the amusement of his siblings, humiliated and furious, Kevin stormed off to his room, slamming the door with a force that shook the family photos on the wall. His mother, Kate, followed soon after, her steps quick and worried. Inside Kevin's cluttered room, amidst posters of superheroes and scattered Lego bricks, mother and son had a heated exchange. "Kevin, honey, it's just a joke," Kate tried to soothe him, but her words felt hollow. "It's always just a joke to you. You never listen. You never care." Kevin's voice cracked with a mix of anger and hurt. Sensing the depth of his feelings, Kate softened, her expression shifting from frustrated to sympathetic. "I do care, Kevin. I'm sorry you feel that way. How about you help hand out candy tonight? It could be fun." Kevin, his arms crossed, wasn't ready to forgive. "I don't want to hand out candy. I just want to be left alone," Kate sighed, recognizing the need for some space. "All right, we'll go out for a bit then. Maybe some quiet will help." With that, she left Kevin alone, closing the door quietly behind her. Downstairs, the decision was made to take the other children trick-or-treating, leaving Kevin at home to cool off. His father, Peter, was uneasy about leaving Kevin alone, especially on Halloween, but Kate assured him it would be fine. "He's safe at home," she said. "What could possibly happen?" As night fell and the streets filled with the laughter and shouts of costumed children, Kevin watched from his window. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. He tried to enjoy his solitude, setting up his own mini Halloween party with scary movies and popcorn, but the joy was fleeting. Unknown to the McAllisters, danger was closer than they thought. News reports of a recent escape from a nearby psychiatric facility buzzed quietly from the kitchen radio, unheard over the sounds of Halloween festivities. The escapee was Michael Myers, a name synonymous with Halloween terror in the neighboring towns, now lost in the noise of a festive night. Back at the parade, as Kate and Peter tried to keep an eye on their other children amidst the crowd, the joy of the evening was shattered by a sudden, horrifying discovery. Buzz was nowhere to be found. Frantic, they searched, calling his name against the backdrop of a parade that had turned grotesque, with monsters and ghouls that now seemed far too real. Buzz, separated from his parents in the thick of the Halloween parade, found himself pushing through a sea of costumes, his annoyance growing. Despite the festive atmosphere, he felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, an instinctive warning that he was being watched. As he rounded a corner into a less crowded side street, trying to loop back to where he last saw his family, the festive noises dimmed. Here the street was dimly lit, the laughter and music distant echoes. He paused, his breath visible in the cold air, trying to orient himself. A sudden movement in the shadows caught his eye. "Hey, who's there?" Buzz called out, his voice more uncertain than he intended. No answer came, just the soft rustle of feet on fallen leaves. Stepping forward, Buzz squinted into the darkness. The figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, broad-shouldered shape, moving with an eerie calmness. Buzz's heart raced, but before Buzz could react, Michael was upon him. The encounter was brutal. Michael took Buzz and crushed his neck. Buzz tried to call for help, gasping for air, but it was too late as a knife plunged, and Buzz's screams were muffled by the Halloween cacophony just streets away. As his body slumped to the ground, the life fading from his eyes, the last thing Buzz saw was Michael Myers disappearing back into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but a chilling silence and the fallen leaves stained with blood. In the safety of his home, Kevin remained oblivious to the chaos brewing outside. That was until a shadow loomed large at the front door, and the festive knocks of trick-or-treaters were replaced by something far more sinister. As the last streaks of sunlight faded from the horizon, Kevin, now alone, turned his attention away from the fading commotion outside. The house felt different in the solitude, an eerie, sprawling maze of shadows and creaks. The joy of having the place to himself began to wane as the weight of his isolation settled in. Upstairs, Kevin busied himself in his room, trying to block out the emptiness with a marathon of old horror movies. Every so often, his eyes would drift to the digital clock beside his bed, the numbers slowly ticking away the hours until his family's return. Downstairs, the doorbell rang intermittently, groups of children laughing and calling out for treats. Kevin, still nursing his grudge, ignored them, the bowl of candy untouched by the door. As the night grew darker, the intervals between the ringing grew longer until they stopped altogether. The street outside had emptied, the laughter replaced by a hollow silence that seemed to press against the windows. Suddenly, a chill ran down Kevin's spine. A slow, deliberate knock echoed through the house, different from the cheerful chimes of trick-or-treaters. Hesitant, Kevin paused his movie and crept to the top of the stairs, peering down into the dimly lit foyer. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Buzz, is that you?" "This isn't funny," Kevin called out, his voice tinged with fear. No answer came, just another series of knocks. Gathering his courage, Kevin descended the stairs, moving quietly towards the peephole. What he saw made his heart stop. A masked figure, standing too still, too quiet for any trick-or-treater. Meanwhile, across town at the Halloween parade, pandemonium broke out among the crowd. Buzz's disappearance had thrown the McAllister parents into a panic. Frantic calls to the police were made as they tried to retrace their steps, hoping against hope that Buzz had just wandered off. But the night had other plans. Unknown to them, the local news was reporting more disappearances, each incident a trail leading back towards their neighborhood. The police were spreading thin, their resources taxed by the sudden surge of chaos. Back at the McAllister home, Kevin, trembling, backed away from the door. He knew he should call the police, but another part of him, the part that loved setting traps and outsmarting adults, sparked to life. If this was just another one of Buzz's pranks, he'd show him. He'd show them all. Kevin set about preparing his defenses, pulling from the arsenal of tricks he had used in the past. Buckets filled with feathers, floors slick with oil, and tripwires connected to clattering cans, all laid out with a precision that belied his years. With his traps set, Kevin hid behind the sofa, clutching the cordless phone. His eyes were fixed on the front door as it shook under another series of knocks. This time, he didn't need to look to know it wasn't Buzz. The air was thick with menace, and the night was far from over. The incessant knocking finally ceased, plunging the house into an oppressive silence. Kevin crouched behind the sofa, gripped the phone tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching longer than the last, straining Kevin's nerves to their breaking point. Outside, the masked figure stood motionless before the door. The cool autumn air swirled around him, rustling the leaves that lay scattered across the McAllister's front porch. His head tilted slightly as if listening for any sign of movement within the house. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he moved. His movements were deliberate, unhurried as he walked away from the door and out of sight. Kevin exhaled slowly, not realizing he had been holding his breath. Cautiously, he peeked over the edge of the sofa, scanning the quiet living room. The digital clock on the VCR blinked 9 p.m. His parents were supposed to be home by now. The uncertainty of their whereabouts clawed at his mind, but the immediate threat demanded all his attention. Gathering his courage, Kevin crawled toward the window, inching the curtain aside just enough to peer out. The street was deserted, the festive decorations on the neighboring houses mocking him with their cheerfulness. He scanned the area but saw no sign of the figure. Was he imagining things? Could the stress of the night have gotten to him? As he pondered, a shadow darted past the window, too quick to make out but unmistakably real. A surge of fear shot through Kevin, propelling him back to his makeshift fortress behind the sofa. Meanwhile, across town, Kate and Peter McAllister were at the police station, filling out a missing persons report for Buzz. The station was chaotic, with officers bustling about, phones ringing incessantly, and other distraught families reporting their own horrors. The news of Michael Myers' escape had begun to filter through the crowd, adding an air of dread to the already tense atmosphere. Back at the house, Kevin realized he couldn't wait any longer. He needed to act. He dialed 911, his fingers trembling as he punched in the numbers. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my house, Kevin whispered into the phone, his voice quivering. Can you give me your address, son? The dispatcher asked, her voice calm and steady. Kevin provided his details, the dispatcher assuring him that officers were on their way. Stay on the line with me, she said. Are you alone in the house? Yes, Kevin replied, hating how small his voice sounded. Okay, I want you to find a safe place to hide until the police arrive. Can you do that for me? Kevin nodded, then realized she couldn't see him. Yes, he said louder. As he spoke, a crash sounded from the back of the house. Kevin's heart leapt into his throat. The figure had found another way in. Dropping the phone, he scrambled to activate the rest of his traps before retreating to the safety of his attic, a last refuge filled with old toys and forgotten memories. The sounds of heavy footsteps echoed below as Michael Myers began to navigate the gauntlet Kevin had laid out. Each trap triggered a cacophony of noise, cans clattering, feathers flying, and slippery floors causing uneven thudding footsteps. From his vantage point in the attic, Kevin listened as the intruder moved through the house. Each noise was a testament to his ingenuity, but also a terrifying reminder that if the traps failed, there was nowhere left to run. In the dimly lit attic, surrounded by boxes and forgotten family memorabilia, Kevin crouched by the small vent that gave him a partial view of the hallway below. His breath was shallow, his body tensed for any sign that his traps might fail. Below, Michael Myers navigated the house with an eerie persistence. The first few traps had slowed him down but not stopped him. A swinging paint can had struck him squarely, causing a momentary falter, but he recovered with a relentless, terrifying calm. Kevin's mind raced as he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps ascending the staircase. His eyes darted around the attic, searching for anything else he could use as a weapon or a barricade. His hand brushed against an old wooden baseball bat, a relic from Little League. Gripping it tightly, he felt a surge of desperate courage. Meanwhile, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached the McAllister home. The dispatcher had been true to her word. Help was on the way. Kevin just needed to hold on a little longer. In the living room, Michael encountered one of Kevin's more cunning traps, a floor slick with oil leading directly into a stack of marbles. As his massive frame hit the ground, the sound echoed up to the attic. Kevin allowed himself a brief, shaky smile, but it faded as the footsteps resumed, more cautious now, more deliberate. Michael reached the attic door. On the other side, Kevin stood frozen, the baseball bat raised in trembling hands. The door handle jiggled, then turned. Slowly, it began to open. Kevin tightened his grip, preparing to swing at any sign of movement. As the door creaked open, Kevin swung with all his might. The bat met resistance, striking Michael squarely on the shoulder. The force of the blow would have felled a normal man, but Michael barely staggered. He stepped into the attic, his masked face turning slowly towards Kevin, the kitchen knife in his hand glinting ominously. "Go away!" Kevin screamed, his voice cracking with fear and defiance. He swung the bat again, but Michael caught it this time, ripping it from Kevin's grasp with terrifying strength. Cornered, Kevin scrambled backward, knocking over boxes and old lamps. His back hit the cold, hard wall of the attic. There was nowhere left to run. Michael advanced, knife raised. But then, amidst the fear and desperation, Kevin's eyes landed on an old toy. A remote-controlled car, forgotten and dusty on a shelf. Without thinking, he grabbed it and threw it, with all his might, at Michael's head. The toy car hit its mark, and for a brief moment, Michael was stunned, the knife lowering slightly. Seizing the moment, Kevin rushed past him, nearly tripping in his haste. He bolted down the attic stairs, Michael recovering and in pursuit once again. Reaching the first floor, Kevin dashed into the kitchen. His eyes searched frantically for an escape or a weapon. His gaze settled on the stove. An idea flashed through his mind. Gas. He turned the knobs, releasing natural gas into the air. As Michael entered, Kevin sparked the lighter he had used for his earlier traps. Flames erupted, engulfing the room in fire. Michael staggered back, his figure silhouetted against the blaze. Kevin didn't wait to see the outcome. He sprinted out of the kitchen, out of the house, just as the fire department and police arrived, sirens blaring and lights flashing. He ran into the arms of a police officer, sobbing, his small body shaking with the aftermath of terror and adrenaline. Did he? Kevin couldn't form the words, but he didn't need to. "We've got it from here, son," the officer said, his voice reassuring. "You did good. You're safe now. We outworked him." After the fiery confrontation in the McAllister home, the night still held more horrors. As Kevin, covered in soot and trembling, stood outside surrounded by flashing police lights and the murmur of curious neighbors, Old Man Marley, the neighborhood recluse who was misunderstood by many, approached the chaos with concern. At the same time, Peter and Kate McAllister were at the police station, receiving the devastating news. The officer's words were a blur. "We found Buzz. I'm sorry, there was nothing we could do." The world seemed to stop spinning for Kate and Peter as the reality of their eldest son's death sank in. Their grief was profound, a mixture of disbelief and crushing sorrow that threatened to overwhelm them. As they rushed home, driven by a desperate need to be with Kevin, the scene they encountered was one of utter pandemonium. Firefighters battled the remnants of the blaze that had consumed part of their home, and police officers were in a tense standoff with a figure who emerged from the flames, Michael Myers. Despite his burns and injuries, Michael's resilience was horrifying. As he stepped through the broken doorway silhouetted by fire, Old Man Marley, who had arrived to see if he could assist, spotted him. The old man's presence brought a calm over the chaotic scene, his life of hard-earned wisdom allowing him to face this terror with a steadfast heart. Police officers, recognizing the threat, opened fire. The barrage was relentless, and eventually Michael Myers fell, his reign of terror ending in a hail of bullets. Marley, turning his attention from the fallen menace, noticed Kevin standing alone, his young face streaked with tears and ash. He walked over and placed a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder, offering a silent strength in the face of overwhelming loss. "Come on, son," Marley said softly, leading Kevin away from the crowd to a quieter spot where they could watch the sunrise together, offering a moment of peace as dawn broke over the horizon. Later, as Kevin sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, the news of his brother reached him. The finality of Buzz's death, coupled with the trauma of the night's events, felt like too much to bear. Old Man Marley stayed by his side, a comforting presence in the suffocating wave of grief. Weeks passed, and the McAllister home was slowly rebuilt, the scars of Halloween night covered up by new paint and plaster. But some scars were not so easily concealed. Kevin, standing in front of the mirror one quiet morning, saw a reflection that seemed years older than his actual age. As he traced the lines of stress and sorrow on his face, Kevin realized that holidays, Halloween, Christmas, any day marked by festivity, would never feel the same again. They would always be overshadowed by memories of this Halloween, the night he lost so much. Yet, in his reflection, he also saw resilience to carry forward the love of his family, to remember the good amidst the pain. With Old Man Marley's support and the community's newfound respect and understanding, Kevin wasn't alone. He had found a new family and those who had stood by him during the darkest of times. Kevin turned away from the mirror, a small smile breaking through the grief. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he was ready to face it, carrying the memory of his family with him into every new day.